I don't forget. And then I'll share my screen. We'll just wait a few more minutes. It's still just a little bit before noon. Oh, that does not look like the right screen. How about that? How does that look? Perfect. Thank you for the thumbs up. 2 screens most days is really nice to have. And then other days when it comes to Zoom, it gets a little tricky to navigate. Okay, I have 12:01, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. There may be pauses as I let folks into the Zoom room, so just bear with me. Welcome to the Women Owning Woodland Virtual Lady Landowner Lunch. If we have not met before, my name is Sarah Havens, and I'm a field specialist in natural resources with the University of Missouri Extension. Just a little bit of information. I guess, share this on a regular basis, but I work out of the Phelps County office, which is in Rolla, Missouri. But I cover, especially for Women Owning Woodland, I cover the whole state. But my regular kind of programming area is the southern half of the state. So just a little bit of information in case you're new with us today. And today's topic is chainsaw sharpening. So I'm going to do my best to give this topic justice through a virtual platform, because this is definitely a skill that is good to do hands-on and to learn hands-on. But I'm hoping I can give you at least a good start if you're thinking about sharpening your own chainsaw chains. And I'll put out a disclosure that it is nice to be able to sharpen your own chainsaw chain, because if you are in the middle of working in the woods, you can do this in the field, you can do it in your workshop, you can do it at home. It's a good skill just because you can get it done and it's available and ready to go as soon as you need it. But there are services where you can take your chainsaw chains off of the chainsaw and you can take them into a local shop, and they will, for a fee, sharpen your chainsaw. And I'll tell you that, so today we're learning hand chainsaw sharpening. So this is, it's not difficult. It just is, it is some labor. And the hand method, it is sometimes not as concise, but sometimes actually better than a mechanical sharpening. So generally the places that sharpen chainsaws for us, they use a grinding tool to do it, and it's kind of an automated thing. And this can sometimes over sharpen your chainsaw or cause just blemishes to your chain as you go forward. So hand sharpening does allow us to see the condition of our chain and to kind of give it that once over. So it's a good job, and we know it's a good job. So again, it is an interesting skill to have. It's a good skill to have. So before I get too far into the topic, what is Women Owning Woodland? This is a program that through University of Missouri Extension, along with partners, we are working to provide learning opportunities to women landowners and woodland enthusiasts, field days, lunch and learns, classes. All of these are geared towards our women forest landowners and woodland enthusiasts as well. Facebook page, if you have any networking questions or other questions about your woodland, also a good place to connect maybe with some of your peers that are also in the same position as you, perhaps enthusiastic about natural resources and woodlands and trying to manage their own property. Upcoming events, I covered these last week. I just added a new one on here. So February 7th and 11th are both tree syruping or sugaring workshops. One's at Springfield Botanical Garden and one is at Woodland. Those are both what I call, general population topics. So they don't have a women owning woodland spin to them. We are going to have a woman owning woodland workshop for timber harvests at WordAC February 12th. So if you are looking for information about conducting a timber harvest on your property, that's a good chance to learn about the process in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we'll go out and look at a recent timber sale that has happened at WordAC. So you can kind of see the on the ground part of it. February 26th is not Women Owning Woodland, but just kind of, again, general audience. And that's another timber harvest workshop in Lebanon, Missouri. So, and that will same setup as the February 12th workshop. So morning in the classroom and then afternoon looking at a local timber harvest that has recently happened. And then registration just opened for this, but Dr. Hank Stelzer, along with some guests, he will be doing a Woodland Steward webinar series, and that'll be February 22nd, March 1st, and March 8th. And so February 22nd will cover carbon markets. March 1st will cover a forest health update from our NBC partners. And March 8th is going to be wildlife habitat management. And this is for probably the not so common critters or not so notable critters. So it's more for amphibians and smaller animals that utilize our property, things we can do to improve it for that. So that will be Tuesday evening, 7 to 8:30. It is a free webinar series. So you'll still have to register through our online system, but no fee for that one. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into chainsaws today. So the first step of this, and at the end, I'm going to try and show you some of these things in my office, so you can kind of see them from different angles, up close and personal. But I'm going to run through this kind of step by step to start with. So the easiest way to sharpen your chain is to leave it on the chainsaw, and you can clamp it to some type of work surface. So you can actually buy these types of clamps at your local hardware store, farm implement store. They have these, and some of them are mobile, so they don't actually attach to the flat surface. And then some actually will attach to a board, which again is nice if you're trying to do kind of a mobile workshop. You can take that board with you and attach your chainsaw. This is going to hold your bar and the bulk of your chainsaw in place and allow you to move the chain only while everything else stays stationary. It is hard to sharpen your chain when your chainsaw is moving while you're trying to move the chain, and if it's not, again, being held in place. So that's the first step. The second step is and you can take your chain off of your chainsaw and use a vise to hold it in place. So that, again, is an alternative. I find it easier to leave it on the chain just for the angle at which I want to do the filing, but we'll talk about that. The next step is you want to use the tension adjusting screw. And this is a very generic picture because the tension adjusting screw is at different places on different models, brands of chainsaws. So you want to make sure you read your owner's manual to learn where that tension adjusting screw is. And you want to tighten it. And this is so the chain, so when we run a chainsaw, this chain on the bar turns, rotates around that bar, turns in circles, and we can leave it very loose on the bar, or we can have it pretty tight on the bar. So we want to adjust it to actually make it tight because we're going to be putting pressure on the chain, and we don't want it to move real easily because that will make it harder for us to file. So we tighten it so we can move the chain, but it is not very easily done. So in the other step, so after these two steps, getting your chainsaw put into a place where it's clamped down and then tightening your tension screw, I would recommend putting on gloves. Leather gloves are great for this, but you do want to protect your fingers. So the chains, the teeth on a chainsaw, we're sharpening, so they're even going to get sharper, but they can cause like nicks to hands. It's good to protect your hands from that. Also, this can be a fairly greasy effort that we put forward. So, and I have just my chain and my sharpening tools in here, and I had greasy fingers this morning. So the next step is what we call setting the file. So there's two parts of a chain that get filed on in order for them to be sharpened. So the first thing we can do is you can either mark the first tooth that you're going to sharpen or file with a permanent marker. And a lot of chains, and I have a dirty chain in my office, and one that definitely needs sharpening. So some of them do have, and at the end, I'll show you this again when I'm probably larger on your screen, but some chains have like a colored piece, and this can help you keep track of. But as you can see on mine, it has been used quite a bit, and it's kind of started to turn the color of the rest of the chain. And so you can use a permanent marker, usually like red or blue, something that stands out is a good idea. And you mark the first tooth that you're working on because we don't want to file the same teeth more than once. And we'll talk about why in a minute. So this can be done, again, permanent marker is a good idea. It's going to just wear off when you go to cutting with your chainsaw. So no worries about that, but it helps you keep track of where you've been and where you're going as far as sharpening happens. For setting the file, then we're gonna use, so we're sharpening the teeth, also sometimes called the cutter, and you are going to want to have a round file for this this part of the sharpening. So this is a picture of a round file from the side. These do come in sizes that match the size of your chain. So you want to make sure that you know what size chain you have. And so that's, again, step one is knowing the sizes of things. So if you have, and I don't have a chain package in my office, but I do have a bar. So chains typically come in 3/16, 5/32, 7/32. I'll try not to push any particular brand, but unfortunately I don't have a budget that's good enough to have multiple brands. But if you look at your bar or look at the packaging your chain came in, it will tell you the size. And so in this particular brand, they use decimals, they don't use fractions. So, but this is a 0.325, which is a 3/16, and it says it on the bar. So I'm going to try and hold this up to my camera so you can see it. So you want to make sure that you match. And again, I try not to promote any particular brands, but this is the packaging that my filing kit had. And so it has that 0.325. So that matches my chain that I'm sharpening. And again, this is important because that rounded file, and again, I'll make myself big at the end, but this rounded file fits. So this is your chain and this is your file. It is going to have to fit in there. So if they don't match, it will be either too small so it doesn't sharpen quite the right way that you should, or it'll be too large and it won't even fit in between those teeth. So that's kind of step one, is it's knowing the size of your chain you're working with and then having the equipment that matches for that. You can buy, so this is called a round file. You can buy this separately. You can also buy it in a kit. So I bought mine in a kit, which is what this particular packaging was from, as a kit. It came with a case that holds it. And then it came with some other tools that we're going to use for the second part of our sharpening. You can also buy, and I try not to overwhelm with too many tool choices, but you can also buy a round file that it's all in one. So it does this filing, which is our round file, but it also has the flat file, which is going to help you with setting the depth of your rakers, which is kind of a second tooth on the chain. And it does it all at once. So you use that piece and it goes across. Same as what we're going to talk about with this round file, but it does both things at the same time. So it's a little more expensive. So I was able to get a round file, a flat file, which is for the rakers, and then what we call a depth gauge, kind of all for less than $30, whereas the all-in-one filing piece was around $40. So just kind of for reference. Parts of a tooth. So I've already referenced some of these, but it probably will help to see what it looks like. So this is the cutter tooth or tooth on your chain. So it's this piece here, and it has two parts to it that we're filing on. So the first part is the cutting edge. So this is the actual part of the chainsaw that is going to cut through the wood and slice off those chips as it rotates through the wood that we're cutting. And this is the actual part of it that we are sharpening with the round file. So the round file is going to sharpen this. Then this is the depth gauge also. So this angle right here is called the raker. And we're going to talk about that because you have to adjust. So as this changes its angle, the depth, so the more we sharpen our chainsaw, the more metal we're taking off here. And this changes then the depth. And so we adjust our depth gauge here to make sure that we're taking this kind of the same size chunk of wood when we cut. So as we've sharpened it, we adjust that. So it, again, kind of maintains the same size chip. If we were speed cutting wood, so if we were, competitive chainsaw operators, we would want this depth to be actually quite deep to take large chunks off at a time. If we were chainsaw carving and making really fine detailed cuts, we would want to have just a very small depth there because we'd just be taking out a little at a time. For most of us, we're just simply using our chainsaw for things like removing limbs and cutting up firewood and cutting up trees that have fallen, perhaps. So we generally can stick with the guidelines that are with our saws that are intended for homeowners and landowners. So following today's guidelines, it will give you kind of the average depth and size chips that makes it a comfortable chainsaw to operate and does cut in a reasonable amount of time. So you're setting the file. So you're going to set your file in the notch on the front of the cutter tooth. And so these are cutter teeth, and a chain has two types of cutters that face alternate directions. So this is my, kind of looking down on it, that's my right facing cutter, and this is my left facing cutter, because that's the angle at which my tooth is cutting at. We will sharpen all the ones that go the same direction at the same time. So as I go around, I will, and for me, I didn't take a very good picture here because you would actually want to turn this around, because we like to file away from ourselves instead of back to us. And so this would actually be turned around, and I'm going to run the file along this. And usually, so whatever hand you write with is usually your dominant and strongest hand. And so that's the one, I'm right-handed. So my right hand is going to do the most work, it's the one I'm comfortable with doing work with. And then this one's just kind of like steadying it. And so you want to set it up so that you are using your dominant hand to push on the file as you work. And so we do alternate ones, because if I were to try and, try to sharpen this one going that way, and then try to sharpen it coming back to me, I would have different amount of pressure that I would put onto that file. And this leads to irregular sharpening of your teeth, which can affect the way that your chainsaw cuts. So I will do the same direction all the way around. So I'll alternate cutting teeth, do every other one. So it's all the same motion. And then I'll move it. I'll do the next same motion. Then, so setting this file, you use the file holder to hold your file at the same angle the cutter was initially ground. And I put this picture up here. So this is on the top of the top plate. This angle, it's usually just like an etched line on the top of that cutter tooth. It is the angle that we want to maintain when we sharpen that cutter tooth. So that is there for reference, but then also on your file. So if you get that specific round file that matches your chainsaw chain, it also has guides on it. So this is 30-degree angle, and this, if I make my chain and this line up, then I will be at the right angle. So as I'm working, I want to make sure I keep that line kind of parallel to my chain as I'm working. And that's going to also help me maintain that 30-degree angle for my cutter tooth. So again, there's line on top of the cutter you can follow. So if you didn't have this guide on your file, you just have this round file piece, you can use this line up here, or you can use this guide to make sure that you're kind of maintaining your angle. So then you're going to simply take that file and slide it across the face of the cutter. And we hold the file so it stays level and flat over the top of the chain. So we don't want to hold it to this angle or this angle. We want to make sure it stays nice and level as we work across. And we only file pushing through the cutter. We don't actually file backwards. So, like a nail file, we sometimes hold and we go back and forth, back and forth. Don't treat this one like a nail file. We're going to take it and we're going to just go one direction. So just away from us, one direction, straight and tall. Then you take it out and move it and do it again. You're going to file each cutter anywhere from 3 to 10 times. So again, depending on the pressure that you put on it, and you do not have to pull this very hard against the tooth. Just simply running it along that tooth is usually enough to help you sharpen it. You do want to count how many times you run the file along each cutter as you go around. And then you want to do the same on each of these teeth that you're sharpening. So again, anywhere from 3 times, 10 times, just make sure you're consistent, because this is going to ensure that each of these teeth is filed to the same sharpness and the same angle, and that's really going to improve your cutting. So, and then, so I brought a terrific chain today because this is one that has been fairly well used, and it's very dark today, but as you sharpen, and I don't have mine set up very nicely, but you will see that your cutter gets a little bit, it's more silvery and shiny. And that lets you know also that it's being sharpened well. So, and again, consistency, count how many times you file the first cutter and then file each subsequent cutter the same number of times. And you're going to work your way around the chain doing all the teeth that go in the same direction. So you'll skip every other tooth. When you get done, so you've put your mark on the chain and you filed your way around, when you get back to that mark, then you're going to have to turn your chainsaw around. So you'll move it so then you have the other ones facing the right direction. So, and again, I took my chainsaw off chain off my chainsaw, thinking it was probably easier for me to show on the camera. So if I worked my way, this is the one that I did first. Then you can either turn your chainsaw kind of away from you and then work your way this way, hitting those teeth that go the opposite direction. Or you can even, sometimes people put their chainsaw upside down to make it a little bit easier for them to sharpen that chain. And it's okay for it to be upside down for this brief period of time while you're sharpening. So you can loosen that vise or clamp and rotate it around, and then you will go back through, and now is your chance to file those alternate cutters that you skipped the first go round. And again, you want to be filing both right and left cutters at the same angles. And this is good for consistency and sharpening. And that's why we skip, because if I did all of them as I was going around, I would be changing my dominant hand so that it would be my left hand, and it would lead to kind of inconsistent sharpness of my cutter teeth, and that can just lead to poor sawing on your chain's part, or on your chainsaw's part. So again, now the next thing, and this does not have to be done every time you sharpen your chain, but you should do it every 2 or 3 times that you sharpen your chain. And this is called filing the raker. And some people actually do this every time they sharpen. It's really personal preference, but this is going to be this other part of each of these chainsaw teeth. So this is the raker, where you can see the arrow that's pointing to it. So as we sharpen, like I said earlier, as we sharpen the cutter teeth, this depth gauge, it starts cutting off kind of less and less. And so we file this down to match the sharpening. And this, again, keeps our depth consistent and comfortable for us to use. So this is done using a different tool and a different file. So you will use what we call a depth gauge. And again, this is a depth gauge, what it looks like. And this is going to be placed over the chain. So again, my chain is off the chainsaw, so we have to pretend like it's flat. But as I go around and have this flat, I'm going to place this, and the part that I want against my raker is this open spot. And I do want this to lay flat. I'm going to try and do that as much as possible. And I'm going to move that raker up into that area. And this is a nice flat surface here. And this is going to be, I will see. So if this matches with my cutter teeth, then I don't really need to take much off at all. But if anything sticks above that gauge, depth gauge, that's what I'm going to file off to adjust. So again, this keeps the depth of the cut consistent as your chain spins around the saw. This is going to help for good, consistent cutting. and we're not going to take out chunks that are too big, which can lead to your chainsaw bucking a little bit more. But we also want to take out chunks that are, you know, a good size, because we do want to, the smaller chunks it takes out or chips that it makes, the more work your chainsaw is doing to cut through that log. So, and again, here's just a really close-up look. So this is the depth gauge. This is the raker. And see this that's like above the depth gauge? We are going to run a flat file. And these, you don't have to buy any particular size. You can buy them at again, a hardware store, implement store. But it's just a flat file, and you're gonna run it, and should use my pointer. You're gonna run it across this flat section until that raker is even with the depth gauge. So, and again, here's a look at that. You want to check for any part of the raker that's above the depth gauge, and if it's above it, then we file it down. So just, this is a look at the one I have in my office. So that raker fits in that part, and I'm going to run my file across that flat part of the depth gauge. So again, I kind of a look at that. You want to make sure that the depth gauge stays flat, so that you, if you lean on this, you might flatten your raker too much or file too much off, which is not the end of the world. It'll just take off bigger chips and have a little bit rougher of a cut. So we want to make sure that we keep that as level as possible. And again, this flat file does not have to be a specific size. It's just a pretty basic flat file. It's got the, you know, grooves on it that take off pieces. And if either of these, so they will start to kind of accumulate metal shavings in them. You know, you don't have to do anything special to clean off the files. You just kind of bang it to the side, and those metal pieces will come out, exposing kind of those filing surfaces again. We file every other raker down to the same height, and then we'll alternate again like we talked about. You don't need to worry about filing the same raker twice. So if you do make your way around and you've lost track of where you are, your depth gauge should show you that it's not above the depth gauge, and then, you know, perhaps you hit it a little bit with a file and because you've forgotten. It does not affect the cutting as much as if we file the cutter teeth more than once. And again, rakers do not need filed every time you sharpen the chain. So if you are in the field, perhaps, you know, again, most of us do not run a chainsaw all day. But if you are out and your chainsaw seems to be not cutting as well as you'd like, and you think it's a sharpening issue, you can go through, file those cutting teeth, and skip filing the rakers that time, just to improve your cutting at the time. And then maybe after that day, you know, you want to go back through, and it's always good for us to do maintenance after a day of cutting with a chainsaw, just to make sure that everything's in good working order and enough oil. So it's always a good practice. So, but again, rakers don't have to be filed every time you sharpen. Finishing up. So after you've, you know, filed the cutting teeth, you filed the rakers, you're ready to get back out there. So you want to make sure you loosen that chain to release the tension and make it more adjusted for cutting. So for cutting, we want that chain to be, you know, loose enough that we can spin it, but not so tight, not so loose that we have any drooping chain on the bar. And then this is also a good time to check the bar oil and add some if needed. So that's, we usually, you know, say every time that you fill your tank of gas, it's also a good time to put bar oil, but also it's not a bad idea to check it after you've done some chain maintenance as well. So any questions? And I'm going to stop sharing, and I will let you, hopefully, if I make myself bigger, it'll be a little easier to see some of the tools and how it works. And I have to say that I do not have, there are a lot of different tools for sharpening chains of chainsaws. So budget-wise, I have limited availability, and I use what works for me. There are different tools that some folks find easier to use. Like I mentioned, there is a like file and raker, or cutter tooth file and flat file that kind of all work together in one piece. And so you're kind of doing both at the same time. And it's a fabulous tool as well. So again, if you have a way that works for you, it's always good to stick with it. But maintaining our equipment is also really important for us to make sure that it is in good working order when we take it out to use it. Okay, so just again, while I'm probably a little bit larger on your screen, this is what my round file looks like. And I'll let you see my messy office so that you can see this a little bit better. So those angles that I talked about, they are up there on the top. If you can see it, probably not. This also, so you can take, so there's a place to unscrew this, and it actually comes apart, comes off, and you can replace this. So if you've sharpened so much that you've worn your file out, you can actually take this out of there and replace it. And then it pretty easily goes back together. And then you just make sure you tighten that back up. And then here's what that depth gauge looks like. So again, this is the end that we're going to put the raker in, and it sits on the chain like that. And we file across this flat area. And then this is the flat file. So, and again, all these three pieces came in one set. And so I simply knew the size of the chain that I was planning to sharpen and got the kit that went with it. You can buy the pieces individually. So you can buy the flat file by itself. You can buy the round file by itself. And there's also some different styles of depth gauges. So some are actually a little bit like smaller, like they're like half the size, and they fit. They actually allow the cutting teeth a little bit through holes in top, and it sits just on top of those. All of them kind of get the same results and work very similarly. It just depends on what you have available. So I know that especially if you live in a small town, sometimes the availability of what's in your local stores can be limited. So finding tools, if you're trying to, find them in the area around you, they can be, again, a limiting factor. Any specific questions? I know this is kind of a hard thing to learn in a virtual world. So hopefully you've perhaps learned enough to at least get started. And it is a little bit of an art to learn how to do it. I do find that it's actually an enjoyable chore, because once you get in the kind of the motions of filing those cutting teeth and running the files, counting the number of passes you've made on those cutting teeth, kind of fall into a rhythm, and it can be enjoyable. Oh, great question. Is there a difference when sharpening electric instead of gas chainsaws? So nope, they actually work the same way. So electric chainsaws have the same chain setup as far as cutting teeth and rakers. So you would sharpen them exactly the same. Great question. So, and I know that some folks that run their chainsaw regularly, they'll have multiple chains. And so you can kind of like put a new chain on each time you go out, and then have them all, sharpen them, spend a nice, when we have these 10-degree days in Missouri, spend a day in the shop sharpening all the chains at one time. So it's, again, just a lot of personal preference there.
Sarah, is there any indications when you're out in the field when the best time to sharpen?
So great question. So you should kind of pay attention to how your chainsaw is cutting. And so we've all, kind of felt probably a new chainsaw.
It's good to pay attention to how it cuts. I know some of us have also probably inherited chainsaws, so we maybe aren't as sure how it would have cut when it had a new chain and was new to it. But indications that you need to sharpen your chain will be like if you've gone from fairly large-ish chips coming out from your cut to like what looks more like sawdust. This is usually an indication that your chain needs sharpened. So, and if you are kind of cutting a similar size log that maybe took you less time to cut through, and now it's like, gosh, it's taking me forever to cut through this, another good indication that the chain needs sharpened. So, and I know that, again, not knowing where everyone is in the state, that occasionally your local chainsaw dealer will also be more than happy to kind of give you some direction on sharpening the chain. Yes. Oh, that's a great question about what is the indicator to know when sharpening won't be effective and you'll need to replace the chain entirely. So usually that your cutter tooth will start to you'll start to see that you just don't have a lot of metal there, and that's one indication. And then another one is that if you've sharpened it and sharpened that, filed your rakers, and it should be ready to go, and it's still perhaps not cutting as fast as it was before, making just really tiny like sawdust, this might be an indication that we've sharpened it beyond what it can it's just ready for a new chain. So other things that if you like, so when you're sharpening, it's also a good time to inspect your chain for other indications of wear. So sometimes, and again, none of us like to admit it, but perhaps, and I live in the Ozarks, we got a lot of rocks. So if you have any cutting teeth that have damage to them, so perhaps they've it happens, we cut through a log and it hit a rock below, things like chipped teeth, missing teeth, rakers with damage to them, those are good indications that it's time to just replace the chain. Yes. So again, most of us are utilizing chainsaws that are kind of intended for kind of landowner use. So there's some other pieces of chain, like if I was a logger, I might want one that cuts really fast because I have a quota to meet as far as trees that I cut down in a day. So just kind of our typical landowner chainsaws. So usually if it's dull, we're going to see like sawdust, like think like what is made from a hand saw. So it's going to be very small pieces of wood. And if our chain is sharp, we should have more like, try to think of a good size comparison or something we'd look at, but it's more like not sawdust. It's more like wood chips that are coming out of there. So they're usually, I don't know, 1/2 inch to 1 inch kind of in length that's being pulled out of there, and then still fairly thin, but they are going to be larger pieces. And And then time. So again, if you kind of remember what a sharp chain feels like, and the amount of time it took you to cut through a particular size, log or branch, if it starts to seem like, gosh, it's really taking me a long time to cut through this, and you start to see like smaller and smaller sawdust size chips, that's a good indication that it is time to sharpen it. And then if you do sharpen your chainsaw chain and it doesn't seem like it's cutting like it should, or you're still making sawdust, or it's still kind of struggling to cut through a log, this would be an indication that it needs replaced. So, and good maintenance is always important for chainsaws. So after using it, it's good to again sharpen the chain. It's also good to clean things like intake filters. And I know my chainsaw that I use is fairly new, but I had taken it out several times and hadn't really done the maintenance that I should have. I'll fess up. And I ended up with like a wood chip that got stuck kind of in between my chain and my chainsaw bar, and it locked up the chain. And so I couldn't, even when I pressed the, go button, like the chain it revved the engine, but the chain didn't move at all. And so good maintenance and cleaning can make sure. Yes. Yep. Before replacing it, make sure you adjust the screw for how tight and loose on the fit. Yep. That's also great advice. So that tensioning. So we can also have sometimes a chain that doesn't cut great because as they warm up, the chain will actually, metal expands when it's heated, and so it will expand and loosen on the bar. So sometimes after about a half an hour of cutting, it's a great idea to adjust that tension screw, and that also can affect how it cuts. Great job. Yeah. All right. Any other questions today? Okay, I will send out this recording, of course, like usual. Registration will be open for February. February is going to be Fridays. If you're interested in joining us for Lunch and Learn in February, they will be on Fridays. Topics are going to be tree sugaring, timber stand improvement, forest management plans, and prepping for a native seed planting. So preparation and putting that down. This time of year is actually after a snow is a good time to put some of our native seeds out for establishment if we're working on getting those put in. So we'll talk about how to do that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.